right, jumping into middle adulthood. So this refers specifically to ages 40 to 65 in the field of psychology. The Erikson conflict related to middle adulthood is generativity versus stagnation, which basically means, um, am I moving forward in my life? Am I moving forward in a career? Or am I moving forward as an evolving person? Or do I feel stagnant, like I'm not going anywhere? Oftentimes, this can be thought of very easily within the setting of a career, but remember that not everybody in middle adulthood is involved in careers. They may be a stay-at-home parent, they may be in the position where they don't have to work and they're more invested in hobbies and nonprofits or things like that. But we as human beings have this need for growth and evolution. So I think that's pretty much what Erikson was referring to with this particular conflict. It could look different depending on a person's priorities, their interests, and their individual lives. Certainly within middle adulthood, we have lots of physical changes. We have decline in some abilities. We go through hormonal changes like menopause. Our susceptibility to disease does increase. Now, part of that has to do with our aging bodies and just genetics, but it also can have to do with the toll that our habits take on us, whether it is a lack of exercise, poor diet, substances to which we are exposed, or other risk factors in our environment that we may be exposed to just because of where we live or because of the different fields that we're involved in. There are cognitive changes that happen. There's decline in some areas and growth in others. This is a time where wisdom, well, that word is used. It doesn't necessarily apply all the time to every individual, but wisdom is really possible because we oftentimes dedicate a great chunk of our lives to a specific endeavor, whether it is learning about something or perfecting a skill or, just thinking about the ways in which we engage with the world every day. Often that comes down to career or educational pursuits. But if we're so immersed in a particular field and skill sets and areas of knowledge every day, you have to consider the impact that that has on the brain, right? So the myelin is likely formed around these neurons that have to do with these activities, and they become much more automatic. Our understanding and our breadth of knowledge and our depth of knowledge can be really incredible. And the other areas where we don't, spend too much attention on, we're not practicing certain skills, we can see a quick decline in those areas. So we do develop expertise in whatever we've been dedicating our lives to for many years, and it can be referred to as wisdom. Some would debate that word used there. There is a need for resilience at this age and at every age. And I know I've mentioned that before. Resilience is never a bad thing, but oftentimes by the time we're in middle adulthood, we've made lots of mistakes. We've been through heartbreak. We've been through very difficult situations and loss. And if nothing else, we get to know how we individually as people tend to cope with those things, what works, what doesn't work, and then usually we adjust, because if something doesn't work and we keep doing the same thing, we end up with the same result, which, if it's not a positive thing, then we're kind of incentivized to adapt. So we'll see lots of that, lots of examples of that in your reading and our discussions for this section. We're going to talk about the possibility of a midlife crisis. This is something that's discussed in many different areas. Some really believe that the midlife crisis is a thing that lots of people go through. Others say it's an excuse. So we're going to take a look at the theories and different perspectives on that in this section. We're also going to talk about the idea of changing family dynamics. We talked about that a little bit in the last section and how it impacts younger people, how it impacts emerging adults. But for middle adults, oftentimes they're the ones going through divorce, through losing parents and grandparents to old age, maybe losing their children in their home due to them moving out and doing other things, going to college, starting families, starting a career. So there's lots of changes that are going on, but also the expectations for families. So we're going to delve into all those things this module. But first, we're going to start off with some theories. And this connects to the discussion board for this section. We're going to start out with Levinson. Levinson is known for a theory that he referred to as the seasons of a man's life. They explore the changes in midlife from the male perspective. So we have to recognize a couple things. First of all, this gives a lot of insight to the male perspective, but what does that mean? You know, diverse wise, who actually was included in Levinson's research? Was it a diverse sample? Was it only white men with money? You know, we have to be critical there. So it can give us a very in-depth perspective of a particular population, but then we have to be clear about what that population was. It also does not give the perspective of women, so it is biased in several different ways. So let's take a look at this. In Levinson's approach, he breaks middle adulthood down into conflicts, just like we see with Erikson, but his conflicts are different. They're more specific and related to midlife and men, likely white men. So first we have this conflict of youth versus being old. So young versus being old, those experiences and the changes physically that we can experience as we grow, but then also societal expectations, that type of a thing. The next conflict is destruction versus construction. So things that are breaking down and things that are being built. Masculinity versus femininity, specifically examined through the male lens. And then attachment versus separation. So in relationships, what does that look like and what changes are expected during midlife? How do we grow? How are we seeing these things differently? As I said before, Levinson's research is biased toward men and includes a stereotypical view of women's life roles. Also, as I said before, we have to ask the diversity question: who was involved in his research? So here's a quote that I wanted to share with you as well. He views midlife as a crisis, arguing that the middle-aged adult is suspended between the past and the future, trying to cope with this gap that threatens life's continuity. So Levinson is team midlife crisis. He really thinks that this is a thing. Vaillant disagrees with Levinson's midlife as a crisis view. So he is team midlife crisis is not really a thing. Okay. He was involved with a longitudinal study with Harvard about happiness. And I think that this is one of the most beautiful studies I've ever seen, and the things that came out of it as far as what really contributes to a life well lived. Okay, so Vaillant believes that the 40s are a decade of reassessing and recording the truth about the adolescent and adult years. So rather than looking at it as a crisis, he's looking at it as more of a reflective space, a time for growth, a time for thinking about, looking back over my life, what have I accomplished? Do I want to continue on this trajectory that I'm on? Do I want to adapt? Do I want to make any changes? I find this fascinating too. He also focuses on the time after the 50s in particular. And it's not just because I'm kind of approaching the 50s right now. That is one reason. But even when I was younger, this kind of fascinated me because this is a time in life where a lot of people are neglected when it comes to psychological research. We get so excited about child development and adolescent development, and a lot is spent on younger adulthood and emerging adulthood now. But after the 50s, this is a lot of complicated time period where people are faced with challenges like, do I have enough money to retire? Do I want to retire? Having kids fly out of the nest, the possibility of grandchildren, what that means as far as exciting and relationships and watching young people grow, but also it means I'm getting old, right? So that brings a lot of pressure with it, but there's also a lot of opportunities for reflection, as Vaillant suggests. Vaillant also agrees with Erikson in regard to several of the stages. such as identity and intimacy, but adds another that revolves around work roles and its relationship to identity, specifically within the social realm. This is another thing that I think is insightful and very worthy of exploration. I know that for myself individually, being a teacher is a huge part of how I think about myself and how I function in the world. Of course, in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom. So think about that with regard to yourself, with regard to the people around you, and see kind of how that feels to you. Gould is fascinating as well. I'm going to move my video down so you can see the whole screen here. So Gould suggested that psychological growth takes place specifically between two opposing poles. So it's kind of like a tug of war. I'm being pulled this way, I'm being pulled this way. So on the one hand, we have the unconscious pull of childhood, where we want safety and comfort, and we're aware of what we can expect to happen. And the opposite perspective is our conscious, where we're going with risk, we're going with challenges. We want to continue to become an individual and move maybe away from that safety and comfort zone. But Gould proposes this as a conflict, a pull, right? So on one hand, I need to grow and adapt. On the other hand, I want to preserve the sense of safety. One of the quotes shared in not our text, but a different text that I wanted to share with you is, adult development is a gradual replacement of the child's sense of safety, which is now an illusion, with actual grown-up safety anchored in mature decisions. That's right from Gould. Okay. So those in their late 30s and early 40s feel a sense of urgency about attaining goals, according to Gould. And also according to Gould, adults go through 7 stages of struggle and resolution. These are worth discussing, but we have to understand that they're based on limited research. So let's take a look at these stages. So Gould suggests that from 16 to 18, people plan to leave home and terminate parental control. From 18 to 22, they leave the family and begin to reorient toward peers. From 22 to 28, they become independent and commit to career and often a spouse and children. From 29 to 34, may question themselves and experience confusion. They may become dissatisfied with marriage and career. From 35 to 43, they may feel an urgent need to achieve life goals, becoming increasingly aware of the passage and limits of time. They often realign life goals. From 43 to 53, they settle down at last with acceptance of their lives. And from 53 to 60, they grow more tolerant, accepting their past. They become less negative and generally more mellow. This may fit many people's trajectory in life, but it also might not, right? So it's worthy of consideration. There's some research to back this up, but it is limited. I also want to point out, if you look at the bottom of the slide, this is from 1978. To give you a perspective, I was born in 1974. So things have, maybe this was the norm back when my parents were of these ages, these younger ages, but this is not the way that life looks for many people in our current times. So there's plenty of room for criticism, but it doesn't mean it's without insight, which is why we're talking about it. Finally, Helson, who's one of my favorites because I have a fondness for the way that she talks about things and the fact that she does focus on women. Not that we only need to focus on women, certainly not, but it kind of adds to that lack of this part of the discussion in the conversation so far. So Helson views particular events in a person's life rather than age as determining the course of development. For example, birth of a child. A woman who gives birth at 21 may experience the same psychological forces as a woman who gives birth at 39. That's not to say all the psychological forces are the same, but those things revolving around pregnancy, revolving around birth and parenthood, those forces are similar. Different contexts, different perspectives in life, for sure, due to age, but they can relate to each other. Helson spearheaded this longitudinal study called the Mills study, and longitudinal means over many years. On the screen, you can see it's actually 50 years, and the participants are now in their 70s. They were examining this experience of women as they age. So, specifically, they were looking at creativity, leadership, personality types, change, and development, work, retirement, relationships, health, social and political attitudes, emotional expression, regulation, and wisdom. So there were so many different things they were trying to measure. But what they found is that there's several pathways to healthy development. There's lots of different choices that can lead a person to happiness and fulfillment. And that may just look different for individual people based on personality, based on their own personal relationships, based on their interests, their career interests, their hobbies, and what drives them. They also found a trend of turmoil in the 40s, but stability by 52. So this may be about making different decisions in life. It may be about children leaving the nest. It may be about divorce. It may be about changes in careers or losing people that you love due to older age or other tragic ways. I don't have that data, but I think it's an interesting trend that there was turmoil in the 40s and stability by 52. For people who were considered homemakers or stay-at-home people, stay-at-home parents or stay-at-home spouses, they had trouble with empty nests if they were, in fact, parents. And a lot of that likely comes from the fact that people who are stay-home parents, so much of their time and their attention goes to those children, which is such a beautiful thing. But then what happens when the children are old enough and confident enough to kind of move out on their own? It leaves the nurturer, the person who was being that full-time parent, with less to do. Now, certainly that opens lots of opportunities, but I think the trouble might come in if the person isn't anticipating this and isn't planning for it, right? So just some things to think about. They also found from the study that blue-collar workers, there was a time of decline. So this could be a time of decline for the fact that there were so many blue-collar working jobs. Certainly those are still in existence. But over time, our society has included more white-collar jobs, especially with the growth of technology and medicine and things like that. There's more jobs in those realms. So we still absolutely have manufacturing and things like that, but there tend to be less factories and more office settings. So there's a time of decline overall in that trend in industry as far as amount of people. But also people working in blue collar jobs, there seems to be this trend, which is frustrating to me because I think all paths in life are important and all are valuable. But there seems to be this huge stress on college. And you might find this a little interesting coming from me as a college teacher. But there seems to be a lack of respect for jobs that don't require college, which is I don't understand that at all. We need people to specialize in these things. And we have people who are extremely talented and skilled in these areas, are very curious about them. And I think those pursuits are just as valid as a college degree in education. So the shift in perception socially of that, the paths that we choose in life, a lack of respect certainly I think has probably impacted people. I would like to look more thoroughly at Helson's particular research to understand exactly what she meant by this. And if you're curious about it, I would encourage you to do the same. Who knows, this might even be a topic somebody might want to pick for their research paper. So let's take a look at just a chart where we're comparing a little bit about these theorists because, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to you at this point, various theorists in psychology, they disagree. They see things differently. And the value in that is that we're hearing all aspects of a conversation. We're getting lots of insights. We're seeing some blind spots. And, it makes the conversation much more well-rounded, I think. So remember that Levinson had this view of seasons of a man's life where midlife was, in fact, a crisis. There were particular conflicts that he identified: youth versus being old, destruction versus construction, masculinity versus femininity, and attachment versus separation. Vaillant was involved with the happiness study in conjunction with Harvard, and I cannot remember if I've made that available to you yet on the discussion or on the Blackboard, but I will take a look, and if it's not there, I will add it. Vaillant did not believe midlife was a crisis. It was more of like a time for reflection. He focused more on the time after the 50s, work roles, and how they affect identity. Gould, remember, was that idea of the tug of war, the opposing forces being stuck in between the need to grow and adapt and the need to preserve safety and the illusion of childhood. Helson was very interested in women and their experiences in middle adulthood. She was interested in a person's life events rather than age, as far as like how it impacts how we see ourselves as people, how we interact with others, and how they determine the course of development. So you have a question posed to you, which one of these do you think is most accurate? Do you find insight and value in all of them? Do you find blind spots in any of them? What do you think? There's also a discussion board connection with regard to this question. The midlife crisis, is it myth or reality? We now have two specific theorists weighing in, and they completely disagree about this. So midlife is defined as a stage of uncertainty brought about by the realization that life is finite, or life will have an end. So the question to you is, does this actually exist? And it's not just, when I'm posing this to you, it's not just an opinion question. I would like to ask you to back up your stance with rationale. Give me reasons, give me research. Maybe you agree with one theorist or the other. Maybe you find a middle ground and you think both of them are right. Maybe it could be a crisis. Maybe it could be a time of reflection. So I'm eager to see what you think about it. And at the same time, keep in mind that the landscape of the life course is changing. And as time goes on past the time when you and I are here, it will continue to probably look even more different in ways we probably can't even anticipate. So these are just some examples of the way that people's lives can change during midlife, really during any other time as well, but these are very common in midlife. So one might choose a second career, one might go back to school, one might move across the country or internationally, one might get divorced and or remarry, maybe have stepchildren and extended families in addition to original families. There may be people in transition for various reasons: losing a spouse, losing a job, having some type of epiphany that, having that second career is important, but maybe not knowing how to get there. People may be facing empty nest syndrome. People may have grandchildren and they're loving that aspect of life, but also that brings challenges with it too. And this is not an exhaustive list. So many other factors can impact development over midlife. I do have another slide, which is meant to be a little bit entertaining, but also to help you think about different ways that midlife can look. So these are just some ways of thinking about how, as we're aging, the different challenges we face, the different stressors that we have to meet. So feel free to check these out. I'm not going to record them on our lecture. If we were in class together, I would, play them. We would turn this into an activity as far as who can relate to what, and, what are we missing? How else can we fill in the gaps that, are not represented here up on the screen? If you have ideas, feel free to add your thoughts on these clips, filling in the gaps, representing other kinds of experiences and life in your discussion board.